The ones whose parents rescued them all the time, they come to resent them. It wreaks havoc on a boy's confidence. We steal our children's confidence by trying to increase ours.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Emil Show, where we talk about all things relational. Today I have a fantastic guest and friend. I've worked with him for several years. We used to work in the same building before he launched his awesome program called Live Strong House. So let me kind of give you an introduction. Mark Spalding, Master's in Social Work, licensed clinical social worker, co-founder and clinical director of the Live Strong House, an adolescent therapeutic boarding school for 15 to 18-year-old boys, and Milestone, a young adult failure to launch program for 18 to 25-year-old males. Mark has a Bachelor's of Science in Family Studies and Psychology from Weber State University and a master's degree in social work with an emphasis in forensic clinical social work from the University of Utah. 30 years of experience working with adolescents, family, and individual therapy. He's a licensed clinical therapist, trained family life educator, neurotherapist, and field instructor at the University of Utah. Mark's also the founder of the De Novo Project, a nonprofit organization that provides scholarships for mental health needs, schools, and programs. One of Mark's hobbies is competing in endurance events. Mark refers to these hobbies as self-therapy. He runs or bikes most days and has competed in marathons, Ironman triathlons, and ultra-distance cycling races. He created his own Ironman distance, 140.6-mile triathlon called the Goliath Race, which helped fund the De Novo Project. He also enjoys hiking, skiing, and rock climbing. Mark's real joy, though, is spending time with his wife and high school sweetheart, Amy, and their 5 children, Devin, Sam, Ty, Noah, and Drew. We're super excited to have Mark with us. Welcome to the show, Mark. The whole purpose of this podcast is I want to start sharing more information with parents and other residential treatment centers of what strategies there are to help teens make progress in their life. And you've got some pretty cool strategies, some novel ideas, some things that you've been doing, and so I want to kind of explore those. Sound good?
Yep.
How did you get into the therapy world in the first place? And then how did you decide to do this program?
Well, I think it all started kind of back in 1997. I was framing houses, and my cousin that I was working for moved back to Arizona, and so I didn't have a job. And I got this job working at a place called Benchmark Hospital. And this is working with adolescent boys that were they were like inner city Chicago, inner city Philadelphia, gang kids that were also listed as sex offenders. So there's a pretty rough group, but I liked it. I'm like, this is kind of my jam. I like these kids. And they're all hard on the exterior, but they're kind of a gooey little soft center, and they're just like everybody else. They want to be accepted, they want to be seen. And so that's kind of where I got my first start. So that was almost 30 years ago, and worked there for a number of years. Kind of moved up, became a program coordinator, and I decided, okay, I'm going to go to school. And while I'm working at various programs, day treatment, benchmark, for the state in juvenile corrections. I work for juvenile corrections in the largest lockup facility in the state, and all the while going to school. So got my bachelor's degree in child and family studies and psychology, and then went on to get my master's in clinical social work. And as I'm going through this process, of course, I'm having a family. I had my 4th kid while I was get my master's degree. And so in the back of my head, I'm always like, I want to start, even as far back as Benchmark, I'd love to start my own program. In fact, I think you and I even talked about doing something. We even looked at a couple of places. I don't know what happened with that, but anyway, it was so long ago.
It's like 100 years ago, right? It's like, because one of the things I remembered is you were talking about you want to create this program. You were still exploring what you're going to call it, but when did you decide that you wanted to do a program? Like, that's a big project.
Really, when I worked at Benchmark. You know, I liked what I did, but I could see all of the what worked and what didn't work. And there's a lot that what doesn't work. One of the things that I noticed is that almost all programs in the country aggregate, which means they put a large group of boys into one
Right.
location, a house or a dorm type style situation, and really kind of like a frat house situation. I think that is the model throughout the country. That is the standard, and that's how it's always been. And there's a lot of good that comes from that, and I enjoyed what I did working in that. But I would think about my own kids, and I'm like, man, if I had to be, yeah, even if you take us middle-aged bald guys and put us in a house of 12 to 20 guys, our collective IQ is going to dramatically decrease. And so I think there's a place for aggregation. It's been around forever. It's tried and true. A lot of good comes from it. But I was thinking, there's a lot of boys that still struggle internally, but they're not necessarily behavioral, right? They're not that oppositional defiant type of kiddo, which is what I've worked with for most of my career. But these are the kiddos that, they're still typical teenage boys, but they kind of fall through the cracks. They're not the squeaky wheel.
Right.
And so it's like, how do we maximize influence? And I think that's one of the biggest differentiators. You can't control anymore, especially when they're teenagers. It's maximizing influence. So then that's where it's like, I kind of have been a nerd, like when it comes to trying to understand these strange creatures of adolescence and their brains, and they're different, and how to basically maximize that influence. And so that's kind of where the design came from. It's like, well, we can't completely get rid of groupthink or negative contagions, when we nor do we want to, but we definitely want to maximize influence. So that's where we came up with a life coach living with 3 boys in a regular townhome in the community with next door neighbors that just have young children. It's interesting. So me, coming from not only the clinical world but as a staff are the most important part of any program, in my opinion. They're the ones that spend the lion's share of their time with our boys. And yet, throughout time and history, staff are always the least paid and the least trained, and yet carry the responsibility of influence. And so that was another factor in trying to create a culture or a way of influencing. We decided to like, hey, we can have these mentors, these life coaches, and we're going to really try to pay them well, give them a salary, but not only that, but we'll pay for the house they live in, we'll pay for all of their food, their car, their gas, health insurance. We match them a 401k, their ski pass, climbing pass, gym pass, right? Everything to help them do what they need to do, because it's a hard job, right? You're living with 3 adolescents. And in some cases a little more for a short period of time, maybe 4 for a very short time. But the turnover usually is really high in an aggregated setting. And it's not because these gals or guys aren't good at what they do and are passionate about helping people. It's like, it's hard to sustain. You can't raise a family on that type of income. And so we wanted to change that and then make them equal partners in the therapeutic process, right?
I've talked with a bunch of different organizations, and that's a shift in the not only the framework but the philosophy and then the structure to pull that off. Because people invest in these programs to make money, and you're taking a big chunk of that money into the program itself. You know what I mean? That's not a money making program.
It's not. We're not a cash cow. We don't turn and burn. I think it's still hard or expensive. We really try not. We have to be, otherwise we can't hire all the staff that we do and have the model that we do. But we really didn't want to sacrifice quality just to get more students or whatever. So, it's definitely, we were told in the beginning, like, it would never work. This is not sustainable. And here we are almost 10 years later. And it's been good. Of course, every program has their challenges, right? On paper, I think it looks like it could be all things to all people, right? Mm-hmm. We got this nice intimate setting. They're out in the community. We have 8 townhomes. They're really nice, but they're not even right next to each other. They're really spread out. And so it's quite the process, and it just takes a lot of.
It's different.
It is different
than the big aggregate,
Yeah.
dorm room kind of setting where you have a house parent that walks the halls to make sure that the kids aren't doing anything stupid and crazy.
But yeah, we can't. It does, like I was saying, we can't be all things, all people. It looks like we could, but we have to be really picky. Like we have to take students that don't have a propensity for self harm, right? Because our boys can get up in the middle of the night, make a bowl of cereal, and we don't hide the knives. And they can walk out the door. So it's different, right?
Yeah.
And we're a longer 9 to 12 month program, and that's by design because we just didn't want to be beholden to the insurance companies and then telling us how long we can or
Right.
can't do, treatment. And
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get some of the details of that, but
sure,
what are some of the challenges, the struggles, like teenagers? You've been doing this for 30 years, bro. Like even from the very beginnings, what have you noticed different about what teenagers are facing now that's different than it's been 5, 10 years ago?
well, I think there's a number of factors, and I say this apprehensively because parenting has definitely got to be one of the hardest jobs on the planet, right? You have how many kids do you have again? Six? I can't remember.
I got 3. I came
You
from a
got
huge
Oh,
family.
you came a family of like, yeah,
Yeah,
gargantuan.
there's 9 boys in our family, so
Nine.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like
Well, we got five, right? And it's kind of like it's hard. But one of the things I've found is that the boys that come in, even more so nowadays, they're a little more mentally. I don't. I say this very carefully. Our boys are just amazing, average higher IQ, just smart kiddos. But in some ways, they're kind of crippled because I think parents, it's that urge to just rescue and kind of if there's distress or problems, parents just want to take that away, which is very understandable. But it wreaks havoc on a boy's confidence. I tell parents all the time that it's interesting. Of all the over all these years, you'll watch these boys, and we keep in contact with all these boys from even 20 years ago. The ones whose parents rescued them all the time, they come to resent them, and it's almost across the board. They resent them for not being a little harder on them, not holding them accountable a little more, not making them do hard things. But it's interesting because boys, or girls are the same. Um, that's hard to admit that we don't want to be rescued and that we
Mhm.
don't want someone to do things for us and make life easier for us, right? That's one thing. I think obviously with today's modern age and social media and just these screens, I think us adults have a really hard time. Their oxy, their dopamine suck. And so it's kind of like, okay, how do we maximize influence and help them? So,
They're being rescued too often, too soon,
yeah.
or they're trying to be controlled. That's another thing that I see is they're making bad choices, so I'm going to try to step in and shape their life because they're Play-Doh for me, and I'm going to make them. And then unfortunately, that doesn't work. And then you got the social media component where they haven't learned how to find the happiness because their oxytocin and dopamine systems are all jacked up. They're not connecting and they're not accomplishing things, and they're being rescued. And so they come in a huge deficit of a sense of self-confidence, a sense of direction. Efficacy is kind of shot, and they're kind of lost on how do they do that? How do they find satisfaction? How do they learn how the healthy dopamine cycle is supposed to work to create accomplishment, to become motivating? And your program has some pretty cool structures to it that address that issue. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is it about Livestrong House that addresses those things?
Well, I think we open the door for failure, right? I mean, our boys are uh, most of our boys will come from like a wilderness program or some type of 30 to 90-day RTC. Very rarely will we ever get a boy from home. But what we've noticed is that those programs are great and they're needed to kind of, man, usually the boys are really struggling, the family dynamic is struggling, and so they need a place to go quickly. And these programs are great, but there's still a bubble, a needed bubble for a time, but they really kind of eliminate the natural stressors and triggers of everyday life. And so they're in these programs for, like I said, 30 to 90 days. But then when they come to us, um, you know, in their heart of hearts, they're like, man, I've changed. I really want to do well. And their intentions are amazing, but they still have the adolescent brain or young adult brain. and then they start coming back into real life if there's just those little stressors and triggers, which is what we anticipate. So we firmly believe you can't create grit or resilience without some of your temptations coming in, right? Some of those just everyday things. Life is hard already. We don't need to make it any harder. And so we just kind of try to our very best to still program more real life. And then if they mess up, we're kind of like, okay, what happened? We're not punishment based. There's definitely consequences, but we don't expect consequences to motivate change. That just doesn't work, right? With any of us, really. Yeah, they can help be the part of the process. They're needed, but it's kind of like we're helping them learn values, accountability, honesty, humility, which means, am I teachable? Why are these values so important? And we call them universal truths, universal principles. Some of the boys are like, well, these aren't my values. It's like, well, okay, that's fair. You're right. These are values that I think are really important, but you just ask them simple questions like, do you think you can have a successful relationship without honesty or accountability? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, see, this is like gravity. It is what it is, right? So it's just trying to help them learn through everyday interactions. One of the cool things about Livestrong House, the DNA, it's more than just like CBT or DBT, right? Dialectical behavior therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. Those are great tools and they're best practice, but how do you infuse that into an everyday life and measure it? So that's why we've really tried hard to make, like, we have our clinicians or our therapists, and we have the teacher, and we have the life coach. Those are the three main, and then there's sometimes more like an executive functioning coach. They're getting together every week. Let's say the life coach says, man, we probably should add this to as therapeutic goals. Yeah, you're right, because you're with them so often. So their input is equally as valuable. And so it's not just, the teacher knows their therapeutic goals. They know their personality. They know the whole thing. So that communication is really ongoing daily. And what that does is kind of like we can measure or observe behaviors from one place to the next, and they all affect each other. And so that's one of the areas that it's like those unseen domino effects, right? Of trying to be consistent. Not that we have our thumbs on the kids, right? But it's kind of like, oh, Johnny, one of his goals is unique to him, and it'll be like, do I create the very behavior in someone else I say I don't want? Right? Some things like that might be unique to them, unique to that kiddo. And the teacher knows that. The life coach knows that. They review that in the evening with their life coaches. And so how am I applying that? Are we seeing this, right? They have to report on that. So it's not just, they're in this program. Are they seeing it? Are the day staff, the evening staff, weekend staff? How is everybody able to see that with every kid? So with us, it's almost impossible to fall through the cracks.
You have got several people about that one kid, and you're seeing not just, you're seeing how they interact with each other. Mm-hmm. You're seeing how they show up in therapy, how they show up in the group, in the interaction with other people, how they're communicating. So all those people, how they're doing in school. So you got this clinical team around that one kid. And you're talking, okay, what do we need to do for this kid? What do we need to add into the therapeutic intervention strategies that can be supported and sustained by the other team members? So it's not just once a week or twice a week they meet with their therapist and everybody else just goes, hey, these are the rules. Everybody follow the rules. It's tailored to those kids.
It's hard. It's messy, right? These are, I think in some ways it might be easier to aggregate and just put a bunch of kids in a house. And that's needed. I don't ever want to disparage any other program. Gosh, there's so many good programs out there that we just have a different philosophy, and we target, a certain kiddo, the ones that would fly under the radar, that can handle a level of freedom that probably some other kids can't, right? And might need a high level of scaffolding in one way or another. And so we try to be very deliberate, and it's been really interesting and fun at the same time.
Got these values. They're called pillars as well in terms of accomplishment for the kids to understand and learn and act in harmony with those types of values. Can you walk us through those?
Yeah. So the first milestone, we call them milestones, is humility. And when a student presents for humility, so not only do they do the work to get there, but they have to present in front of their clinical team. And remember, they're the head of their clinical team. They are their team, right? They have say, they can say, I want to add this, whatever. So it's not just us coming in and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. And the parents are also a part of that team as well. So that's an important aspect, but they're presenting on universal principles. So one of them would be in creating the handbook, it was kind of like one of the universal laws, which is if I want something and I go about getting it the wrong way, I'll get the opposite and more. And it almost sounds too simplistic in a lot of ways. Like, well, that's not true, right? I'm like, well, apply it to anything in your life. I don't care what it is. You give me a scenario that you wanted and you went about getting it the wrong way. And then I'll say, well, who are you to say what's right or wrong? I'm like, you're right. There's lots of right ways and there's lots of wrong ways. Let's work this out, right? And so we'll just start applying that simple principle. So they got to present that situation like, oh, I wanted to escape stress. I wanted to be accepted by my friends. I wanted to, get rid of my anxiety. So I smoked a lot of THC. And I'm like, that it worked. That's the caveat, is that it works for a short period of time. But then you go further, like, well, do you have those things now? How did you go about getting that? Well, I used weed to escape and it worked. But now you don't have what you wanted, right? You're not with your friends. You're not even with your parents. You can't even go to the school you want to go to, right? Your job, your income, all these things. So it's not even not getting what you want. It's the and more. So whatever you want, if you go about getting it the wrong way, you get the opposite and more. So then we start going, oh man, I lose self-respect. It was respecting my family, my friends, the friends that I formed this connection with that's kind of surrounded drugs, right? Doesn't work. We all know that, right? And so all those things will be taken from them. But the caveat to that is whatever you want, if you go about getting it the right way, it doesn't guarantee you're going to get it, because that would be fair and life's not fair. So we're very practical in how we approach things. But this is one of the things they have to present on. Like, what are the universal laws? If I can't control myself, someone else is going to control me. I don't want to be controlled. There's certain things that you have self-mastery. So they're applying these things every single time they go for a milestone. The next milestone is courage. And then the milestone after that is resilience, and then patience. And then finally you get on strong. And so every single time they're moving through, they are presenting on, another thing they would present on would be rational emotive behavior therapy. And rational emotive behavior therapy is such an amazing tool because it's just simple. Albert Ellis, I believe, is the one that kind of came up with it. It's a subcategory of cognitive behavior therapy, but it's basically a really cool way of disputing irrational beliefs. And we all have irrational beliefs that we hold true and they're not true. And so it's just a really cool way. So the boys have to learn how to implement rational emotive behavior therapy and present on a couple of scenarios every single time they present for a milestone, every time they move up. So repetition is the mother of retention. How do I apply that to my life? Do my actions match my values? Very simple.
There's so many layers to what you're describing. This is actually training executive functioning skills, like embedded in the process of just going through the steps of what they do to move forward through the therapy, which is not even a part of it's separate, but a part of the therapeutic discussion in the therapy mode. Yeah. Because they're having to do these exercises that have them start to think through these different scenarios of how do these values apply, which takes them to another level of change, because we've got behavioral modification, but now we actually have cognitive development and value maturity, like moral reasoning maturity happening, all part of what you're describing, and it's all woven together. It's pretty sophisticated, even though it's kind of like these are simple steps, but there are so many different layers to it.
Yeah, we tried to make it as simple as possible, but at the same time, because these are adolescents, and we wanted them to be like, these are tools that I use on a daily basis. Are my actions matching my values? A lot of times they don't. If you ask a kid, like, what are your values? Like, oh, my friends, family, my freedom, money, working out, health, right? And sometimes honesty, and sometimes, accountability in there, but, usually not. But I'm like, okay, well, let's look, what got you to this point in your life? Where you at? And we start listing some of the actions, and the actions are like, well, I stole from my parents, right? I would slough school and sit in my basement all day long, and I would smoke weed, I would lie, cheat, steal, right? And it's interesting. I'm like, well, it looks like these are some of your values. And they're like, those are my values. I'm like, are you sure? Because are you with your family now or your friends? No. I'm like, so these things are more important. Then they start getting a little frustrated, like, no. I'm like, I'm just the bearer of what's pretty evident. So it's them really reflecting, right? That's what they have to do, is, and that can be really frustrating. And for us as adults, we're the same way. It's like, oh gosh, I say my family's at the top of my list, but where am I spending my time? And so I need to check this often. What are my actions compared to my values? Because I always tell the boys, I'm like, if your actions don't match your values, eventually your values, your stated values, will be taken from you. That's when you get into, psychodynamic type, therapy, and really kind of getting into what are their beliefs, where they come from, which is how to dispute them. And so there's a lot to it, but yeah, it's just all part of the progression and that repetition, and then just trying to have fun too, right? We're really active. I would say every single night the boys are out either like rock climbing or, I don't know, going on some activity with some other life coaches. So they'll get together with other houses and other life coaches because they're not right by each other, which is kind of more real to life.
Right.
Some will use their budget. They learn how to budget with their life coach. They have a house budget for food and activities. And someone will like, well, let's go night skiing. So get, which is not what we provide. We don't provide a night skiing pass. We provide a pass to Snow Basin, but they'll use their budget and either maybe not go to a movie or dinner that week for something to save so they can go and buy some night passes. So they're learning how to navigate that as well.
How do you do the consequences? I've noticed that, a lot of parents struggle with expectations and consequences. What's your approach on expectations and consequences in the program?
So we try to make the consequences pretty clear. Like if we do drug testing twice a week, and then we do random drug tests, and it's a pretty comprehensive drug test. It's like 130 plus panel tests, which is kind of overkill actually, but it helps us know not only some of our kiddos are on medication, but we can monitor that. If right, hey, how's that going? Is it steady? Right. We also monitor if they were taking, if they have THC in their system, and what did they just get back from a home visit? What does that look like? So a consequence for that is laid out, right? They know what the consequences are, which might be, hey, we call it reflection. Reflection could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, but it could be one of the boys have a gab phone, which is another thing, a privilege that they earn, right? It looks like an iPhone, but it's really calling text, and it get them ready for an iPhone later on. But they might have, like, they've lost that privilege of having this phone, right? Or they lost the privilege of going on any paid activities or skiing on that Wednesday. If something happened in school, let's say they were disrespectful to a teacher or something like that, right? Then they lose rec day and they're in school doing other stuff, right, to help catch up or whatever. So we try to make the consequences a little bit more realistic to life, and I think in some ways they sting, but they're not like isolation or we still want the boys to get out and be active even if they're on reflection or go on a hike. Like me and one of my business partners just this morning took 4 boys on a hike up Adams Canyon. Even if they were on reflection, we wouldn't consider that something that we would withhold.
Right, because that's a healthy thing for them to go on a hike with
Yeah.
their peers and their, professionals. That's not like, hey, this is a real treat. As cool as you guys are, it's still not like,
Right.
It's actually therapeutic to be on that hike.
Yeah. Yep. We still want to, create relationships, but then sometimes a kid will, they have plenty of opportunity. They're in they all have gym memberships to Vasa, so they're in the community in the morning. They all go to the gym, and that's just out with regular people. And yes, their life coaches are there, but it does give them ample opportunity to like steal something. Like if someone's vape is sitting there, the life coaches might not, have eyes in the back of their head, but they might steal it, and then it always comes out, and we're like, oh, so we're not trying to be the policeman. We're not trying to catch you, but we definitely want to create a safe environment. And then it's like, okay, what happened? What was the temptation? What was the trigger? What was going on, right? What was the emotional? Let's look at that. Let's talk about that. And there's some consequences. But let's say a kid does that and they know that they have a home visit coming up. And you're thinking, oh, they knew that. One of the goals is try to get the boys to want to be with their family. And this is another thing parents have a really hard time with. They're thinking, I sent my kid away. I made them go here. But the reality of the situation is parents they have their values, and the kids change the game. They start doing things like sneaking out at night, smoking weed, doing all these things that go against the family value. So in a lot of ways, it's not the parents pushing their kid away. It is the kid choosing not to be with them. A big mind shift, because parents are thinking, oh, I'm pushing them away. So then when they're on the phone call with them during the week or they're on visits, they're always trying to appease them because they feel guilty. But the reality of the situation is their son is not choosing to be with them. They're not willing to follow the rules of their house. They're not willing to let the parents set appropriate boundaries. And so I'm always telling parents like, hey, you are good people. You're trying to set boundaries now. And if he chooses not to follow those, that's not you kicking him out of your house. That is him choosing not to be with you. And so one of the things that will happen, back to my original point, if a kid gets in trouble, he might forego a home visit, which is like, oh my gosh, that's a big deal. The parents are upset, the student's upset, but they chose it. Why are they choosing to go and do something to prevent a connection or be with their family, right? Why is that? Where is that self-sabotage coming in? That speaks volumes. So that gives us a lot to work with, if that makes sense.
Instead of trying to prevent them from doing bad things, you give them opportunities to do things with supervision, but you're training them to start to evaluate whether or not these choices are worth it. And then you teach them the reasoning processes and the value systems that if they can kind of start to get some traction on, it's not just behavioral modification, it's really it's value modification for them. And if the values change, then the behavior is a lot easier to sustain. What's the hardest thing? Let's say a parent has an issue with their kid and, the normal, there's defiance, there's not doing their share at home, they don't want to go to see a therapist because all therapists are stupid, no one gets them. They're using substances to manage their mood, to be accepted. What can a parent do? Like, there's so much cool things that, you do in a group home because you got 5 staff that's helping this kid. What can a mom or a dad do? Simple things, not that it's going to, change the world, but what can a mom and dad do for their kid since they're not in your program? What would you suggest?
One of the things that it's a simple rule, which is, I said earlier, like this one kid, what am I doing to create the very behavior in this other person that I say I don't want? That's a universal principle, or something that most of us parents fall into. Nobody escapes this. Most of us parents try to motivate through criticism, fear, guilt, and we're sometimes a lot of times Captain Obvious. So we tell them everything they're doing wrong to get them to do what we want them to do right, and that never works, right? So it's not that these parents are doing anything that's super harmful. It's just the counterintuitive thing to do is, hey, I'm really sorry, being accountable themselves, that I didn't set this boundary. You teach a masterful class on this, right? This is one of the crux. How do you motivate a kid when you can't control them? It's being accountable yourself. So it sounds too simple. It sounds cliche, but if I want to change another human, I've got to change myself. What am I doing to create the very behavior in another, or in my son, right? Right now, we're working with a family that at home, this kiddo, most kids will resent their parents for X, Y, and Z, but they're really struggling because the parents are like, well, they're trying to set appropriate boundaries, but everything's measured. Everything has, like, it's always him reporting to them what he's improving on or not improving on, right? We do that as parents, but we're accountable to that too. What am I improving on? What am I, doing? And so it can be easy as like, hey, man, I totally came off at you wrong. I'm struggling myself with some issues, and I apologize. I'm going to try to do better at this. It totally gives your son or your child the permission to do the same thing. Kids do what we do. They don't do what we say. And again, sounds too simple. It's so difficult because one of the trainings I'm going to be doing with our parents right now is most of their reactions are from their own childhood, right? Their own trauma. It's almost as if they're being hurt, or, so they got to rush in and alleviate that stress or anxiety. So part of it is like recognizing, what do I got to do for myself? What am I creating? So sometimes it's just enough like sitting down, writing it out. If you just kind of go through it in your head, it's going to get lost. I think it's deliberate, right? What do I keep having struggles with? I bet with most parents, the struggle they have is going to be around the same 3 or 4 things, if not 2. But yet we go on this circle.
That's huge. That's a really big deal, because I think that is not what normal parents do. Normal parents feel like that they need to teach their kid, who's like almost like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, like, teach them what you want them to do. And so when they're a teenager, they think that they can use those same tactics, and it just doesn't work. But to sit and say, wait a minute, what if I took accountability for how I'm not showing up the way I need to show up in this relationship, and help kind of give some context to why things are not going the way I want them to go, and take ownership of that. That is such a foreign concept to parents, but I think that is so potent. And I think both of us have seen the magic of that. Like when a parent says, I'm sorry, not doing a good job, holding boundaries. I'm using threats instead of following through. I'm being lazy, and it doesn't make sense for me to expect you to follow through with what I'm asking you to do when I'm not following through with what I say I'm going to do. And so I'm failing. And usually, like you've probably seen this too, the kids are so discombobulated by that. They're like going, well, I mean, I got to roll in this too. Which you could spend 2 hours trying to explain how the kid needs to pull their crap together, and they're not going to see it until the mom and dad go, hey, I got to take accountability here. That's powerful advice for parents.
And it almost seems so too, you and I will watch podcasts, other parenting experts, whatever, and it almost sounds too simple. It's very difficult, right? There's, different situations, but things don't just change, right? One of the things that we teach the boys is like, hey, we're really kind of only born, as far as I understand it, with 2 fears, and the fear of loud noise and the fear of falling, and they're really only startle reflexes. So that means all other fears are really kind of learned. If we can start changing some of this belief system on how you respond, the emotional doesn't just match it right away, right? We don't have emotion without a belief first, but sometimes the emotion, once it latches on and reacts a certain way, the speed at which it responds neurologically is like 13 times faster than our frontal cortex, right? But if it's based in true principle and you keep at it, because that's the hard thing with parents. We're like, hey, try this, and then they'll try it, and they're like, I tried it, it didn't work. What else you got, right? It's like, well, let's try it a few more 100 times because it's still based in true principle. And that's the hard part, is being patient and keep working at it, and just taking ownership of your stuff. Well, one of the things I think as parents, we're guilty of as well. We have 5 children. One in particular, our second oldest son, is on the spectrum. So what I found myself naturally doing is I need to make things fair for him. The world's not fair. It's not fair that he has these struggles. So what am I going to do as a parent? I'm going to go make it fair, right? I'm going to step in and start doing it. So it's hard not to do those things, but that is so key, letting them fail, and I think for a lot of parents that is just almost unacceptable, that they can't fail. Like, yeah, but if they don't write their essay for that school, they're not going to get in. I know. Come send them back a year. That's a huge failure, right? Or whatever. It depends on your viewpoint, but probably could be some of the best growing that they'll ever learn, that they're not going to learn unless you let them learn it. So sometimes just withholding, saying, man, what are you going to do?
Yeah, how are you going to handle that? That sounds like a tough situation. You didn't get your stuff done.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's rough. Instead, as parents, because we care, we rescue, and sometimes the rescuing is the very thing that perpetuates the behavior that we don't want. Back to your statement before, is what are we doing as parents that's contributing to the very behavior that we're trying to change?
Yeah.
And our good intentions, unfortunately, are not adequate to
we
maximize
steal
the influence.
our children's confidence. One of the quote by trying to, I like this quote, but I can't even increase it. By trying to increase our confidence by rescuing and being like the parent who makes sure nothing happens to our kids, we're actually stealing from our children to bolster our confidence while stealing theirs. And I'm like, that is so true.
And no parent would ever want to sabotage, consciously, deliberately sabotage their kids' potential for success. And as a consequence, though, by not regulating or figuring out their own stuff, they end up contributing to it. So I think that the counsel you give is, as a parent, if you're struggling with your teen, stop focusing on trying to change your teen's behavior and start focusing on your own behavior that is contributing to the behavior that you don't want to see. Start there, which is actually a pretty good example for creating change as a model for your kid. And it also takes away that power struggle that seems to be to supercharge the behaviors that we're trying to kind of correct. One of the things I've noticed you do is, and I've had the privilege of working with you on these things, is you invest a ton on parent training. You do a ton of that. And that's just a tribute to you seeing the whole thing as a system and not just, okay, we got this kid. And that's been really fun to do personally, but it's been really helpful for seeing the whole thing holistically. As a parent just trying to strut, if a parent was going, hey, I like what you're doing, do they need to go to a wilderness program first, or how would they go about finding you to see if their kid is a good fit for Live Strong House?
Good question. So it kind of depends on the situation with your son. So we don't take kiddos who, like, let's just say you're coming from home and you're needing a place. We're not a detox, right? They might need to go to a wilderness program to kind of like detox from social media, detox from substances, right? It's just an excellent way to do that. And then they're ready to come, because if we bring in a kid that's straight from home, usually they haven't even started that process of change, the change talk in their own mind. Like,
Right.
Do I have a problem type of thing? And so that kind of starts getting worked on. They detox, they can think a little clearer, because there's a lot of freedom, and they have to be able, in a place where they'll be able to handle that level of freedom to some degree. Most of our boys will need to go to a program, 30 to 90 day program type thing, before they come to us, to kind of get that ball rolling.
So how would they go about doing that? Who would they contact? Do they just get online and go, hey, wilderness therapy programs near me? How does that work?
Yeah, I think that's what you do, is just get online and Google educational consultant or consulting to help me find a place for my son or my daughter. But, we do have parents they do their own homework. And I think you really got to do your homework, and you're entrusting the care of your child to strangers. And so one of the things that you can do is, there are Facebook groups. I think there's one that we're not privy to that, because we're a program and it would be ethically not appropriate for us to be on those groups. But it's like parents who have children in treatment, and that's right. So it's kind of like this close knit group of moms that are on this Facebook page. Get on there; they'll tell you. Right? Start searching other parents that, what have you done? And so then you're getting, because if you go off of, like, I don't know, Google ratings or whatever, I think that can be really hard or misleading. And so I think doing your homework, trying to find other parents that have been in and through this, is very valuable. And so if you don't use an educational consultant, then that's another way to go about doing that. And you get on there and just be honest, and you'll get moms that say, oh, or dads. Usually it's moms. It's really weird, because a lot of people, even educational consultants, like, oh, I don't even know about you, Live Strong House. Where did you come from? I don't know. We've been around.
Yeah. I think you guys are so successful is because of the program is so solid that people talk about it that have been there, and then those parents know other parents, and then they tell, and then those education consultants find about you. So yours is very organic. It's been really helpful to have just the different layers, the scaffolding, the value driven, focusing on the connection way more than trying to change people's behavior, where so many other programs are so behaviorally focused that they miss out on the most important pieces, and that's developing these young people into successful, healthy, value-driven adults.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody's watching this, Emil Harker is a master at conflict resolution and just one of the best at what he does. So however you can use Emil Harker, and he didn't pay me to say this, so whoever's watching, I don't know. Just a top shelf fella.
It's fantastic. I've been working with Mark for several years, known him in some even before then, and top-notch guy. You'll trust your kid with him. If he did a sleepover, he's just an amazing guy. So he's a great guy. All right, we'll catch up with all you people's watching with more of these programs. Again, like you're always supposed to do with these podcasts, like it, share it, subscribe, you know the deal. And hopefully you'll get value out of this and the ones that we come with more. So until then, see you later.